Well, this week we got a lot of questions about the new box joint jig, and I'm going to try to answer 2 or 3 of them for you right now. First up, Dear Stumpy, I see you already made some improvements to the new box joint jig. Since I already got plans, does that mean I'm going to be left out? Heck no. Actually, the most important improvement that we made was after we did the original film, but it was before we released the plans. And that, of course, was the handy-dandy new micro adjust feature. What makes it so handy and dandy? Well, it has 2 purposes. First, if you just want to cut some kind of fancy joint with maybe variable finger spacing using your pattern but without using the positioner, you can use the micro adjust to help make it easier to line up your cursors on the pattern lines. Second, and most importantly, the very first time you put your pattern underneath the shield, it can be a little bit tricky to line up with the cursor marks on the box joint jig. The micro adjust makes that a lot easier. So you can be certain that the marks on your pattern line up perfectly with the teeth on your lead screw, which of course is critical. Once you get that pattern aligned, it's not going to move unless you pull it out. The double shields keep it from going anywhere. So the micro adjust is going to make it easier to get things set up the first time, and then after that, you should be good to go. Again, that micro adjust feature has been in the plans the whole time. So if you picked them up at stumpynubs.com before, or if you plan on getting them later on, it's going to be in there. There are a couple other changes, well, 1.5 changes that weren't in the plans. But don't worry, these are optional retrofits, so it shouldn't mess up your build at all. I'm going to just tell you how to do them right now. First, I swapped out the original spring clamp positioner for a new toggle clamp. I like the toggle clamp better because it stays up in the unlocked position in case I want to move the carriage freely or maybe do some cuts without having the positioner locked down. I don't know why I do that, but it's nice to have options, eh? I also find that the toggle clamp is stiffer, which prevents side-to-side movement, especially when you're using that micro adjuster. I found that if your carriage has a little too much drag in the track, whether it's because you made the dovetail slot too tight or maybe you need to put a little wax in there, well, that can cause the micro adjuster to put lateral pressure against that positioner. You want your positioner to be stiff enough so that the carriage moves, but not the positioner clamp itself. And I think the toggle clamp is a little bit stiffer and answers that a little bit better. Well, if you decide to go with the toggle clamp, that means instead of attaching your split nut to your spring clamp, you can attach it to a little piece of plywood, cut just long enough to reach from the toggle clamp itself to the lead screw, because your toggle clamp's not going to be long enough. And then you use a couple of screws and washers to hold that piece of plywood to the toggle clamp itself. I used 1/2 inch thick plywood, a scrap that I had laid around from the project itself. And the reason why I picked 1/2 inch, besides the fact that I just said it was a scrap, was because it was the perfect thickness so that when I had my toggle clamp set to the down position, the threads on my split nut locked onto the threads on the lead screw. Now, not all clamps are created equal. This one that I used was from Harbor Freight. The ones from Rockler, for example, are a little bit taller. So you might have to use 3/4 inch plywood instead of 1/2 inch for that little block that's going to hold your split nut. You want the nut to just make contact with the threads. You don't want it to clamp down really tight. That's going to make it impossible to use your micro adjuster. It takes a little trial and error, but not too much. If yours is clamping too loosely, then add a shim between that little piece of plywood and where it screws onto the toggle clamp. If it's clamping down too tightly, then add a shim underneath the base of the toggle clamp. Like I said, a little trial and error will get you a good fit, and once you do it, you don't have to mess with it again. Now, there was one other upgrade that was kind of in the plans, but not entirely. The plans have a parts list, and that list included a piece of T-track. And people have been emailing asking me what that T-track was for. I didn't put in there what I was going to use it on. And that's because I went back and forth on this idea. I was thinking of having a way to use another toggle clamp to lock my workpieces in position. And so I ran a T-track on the front of the carriage. Now, to do that, you're going to have to also include a couple of wood strips so that your workpieces will still lie flat against the carriage. I just used a couple of scraps left over from the project build. You're also going to have to get one of the toggle clamps that has a base that will attach to a T-track. And those you can get from rockler.com. The upside of this upgrade is that it's really convenient. The downside is it doesn't work so great if you're cutting 4 workpieces at once. I'm just using it on 2 workpieces. And it adds, by the time you buy your toggle clamp with the base and your T-track, it's going to significantly add to the overall price of the jig. So if you want to skip that feature, you can just use a couple of regular woodworking clamps to clamp your workpieces onto the carriage as you make your cuts. Next up, Dear Stumpy, I'm having a little bit of a problem getting the pattern in my box joint jig plans to print out 100% to scale. Any suggestions? What this person's talking about is at the end of the plans, there's a pattern that you can print out and slide under your shields to use for cutting various joints from 1/4 inch up to 3/4. Some printers do strange things. They may shrink the image a little bit to adjust for margins or to fit to the page, or maybe just tick you off. Go into your printer preferences and make sure that there isn't some kind of box check telling it to shrink the image or otherwise adjust the size. Unfortunately, every printer is different, and I'm a woodworker, not a member of the Geek Squad, so I can't tell you how to do it on your printer. All I know is it worked fine the first time on mine. Yours may be different, so you want to check them before you slap it into your jig and start cutting joints. When you print out your pattern and you stick the 2 halves together so you have one long 22-inch piece, get out your ruler and make sure that the lines line up with the lines on your ruler. If they don't, you're going to want to take it over to somebody who has a better printer. As a last resort, you can just make one out of good old-fashioned paper and pencil. It's just rows of lines spaced evenly from 1/8 inch in one row to 1/4 inch in the next one, and I think 3/8 in the next, all the way up to 3/4 of an inch. So if you've got a ruler and you can see to make 1/8 inch marks, you can make your own pattern, no problem at all. Just use the one in the plans as a guide. That's sometimes a lot easier if you're having problems printing it out. Like I said, only a couple people have had problems, but I know that technology can be a little frustrating, and there is a workaround. One more on the box joint jig. Dear Stumpy, which is better, the old box joint jig or the new one? Well, actually, Mustache Mike and I have been filming a head-to-head box joint jig duel between both versions. We'll have lots of footage of both jigs in action. We're even going to cut a little more complex joint than you've seen in the other footage. So stay tuned and we'll see which one comes out on top. Moving on. Dear Stumpy, I love the new box joint jig, but what's next? Well, if you've been following us on Facebook and Twitter, you already know the answer. So, being that you asked, I'm going to assume that you don't know what this tweeter thing is, or maybe you're one of our seasoned citizens and the Facebook thing kind of scares you. No problem, it scares me a little bit too, mostly because I can't speak in abbreviations and I still don't know what an emoji is. But in the fast-paced, pedal-to-the-metal, edge-of-your-seat world of internet woodworking, the best way to stay in the loop is through social media. From Facebook to Twitter to now Google+, we can use these to update you faster and more often. Now, what was your question? Oh yeah, what's next? Well, let's take a look at the Facebook feed and see. Sometimes I ask people on Facebook to look at an image and try to guess what the jig is for. This one was pretty easy. It's a homemade version of the super awesome yet nauseously expensive Festool Domino, a handheld mortising machine that you can make yourself from a trim rotor. It'll be online this weekend. I hope. One more. Dear Stumpy, some time ago you said you were going to do a review on your SawStop table saw. When's that going to happen? Well, it has been several months since the SawStop was moved into the shop with a bang. And I did indeed promise a review. But the more I thought about it, the more I really didn't want to rush it, because this is a major purchase for any woodworker. You don't want a review from a guy who just took it out of the crate and gave his first impression, or even his second impression. I wanted to live with it for a while, run a bunch of hardwood through it, hit a few nails and set off the break a time or 2 or 3 or 4. I wanted to really put it through the ringer and see how it holds up. Don't get me wrong, I'm not abusing the saw, but I'm not babying it either. I've worked it like a kid on a summer break for a long time now, and I am about ready to answer the burning question that everybody has regarding SawStop. Is it really that much better than the far less expensive saws? My no BS review is coming shortly, so go over to stumpynubs.com and sign up for the newsletter. You're going to want to see this. Well, that about wraps it up for this edition of Dear Stumpy. Click on the contact link over at stumpynubs.com to submit your questions and check out all the other woodworking goodness we have over there. There's something new posted almost every day. And until then, you can sit back and have yourself a cold one, because you've earned it, my friend.